Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Yes.
Yep, run it.
Season 2, episode 4.
Episode 4,
Garden of Bones.
Garden of Bones.
The bounds. Breaking the bounds.
I'll break in the beard.
Did you have anything before we start?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I always try to remember the first scene. So I like to try to jump back into it so I can be like, oh yeah, that's right.
It's the 2 Lannister guards. It's raining. Yeah.
See, I already forgot.
No, well, I only know because I have the notes in front of me.
All right, right into it.
So raining, it's 2 guards, they're near a campfire. They're talking about, they start talking about the mountain. The one guy says he's the biggest, the strongest. And then they're talking about knights. And they bring up Loras Tyrell. And one of them's like, he's prettier than the queen. And the other one's like, oh, he's a good knight. And he's like...
Well, the one guy's like, he's better with a sword than all of them.
Yeah. And he said, well, he's been stabbing Renly for years, and he ain't dead. Just a pretty, funny joke.
And I think we mentioned on the last episode, like, I'm not sure too many people know about him being gay.
Yeah.
But
about Loras.
Definitely known.
It's definitely being put out there. Everyone's kind of joking about it. The one is kind of, as this conversation's going on, he's like, well, it's something weird. The horses seem spooked. And the one's like, nah, I don't hear anything. And the one has his like helmet on.
Yeah.
And he's like sitting by the fire, and he's the one that doesn't hear anything. The other one's he doesn't have a helmet on. I can't quite remember if he even has armor. I think he just has his chain.
He's just chilling.
Yeah. And he's like, no, I think there's something out there. They're acting weird. And he like kind of pulls his sword, and the other one gets a little...
He's like, oh, shit.
So like there's this intense moment. He gets up, there's silence, and then the one that doesn't have his helmet on farts.
Holly, just FYI, Holly loves fart humor.
Yeah,
it is pretty much her favorite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So Holly found that hilarious.
As always. I think last episode I was like, I really hate the fart humor. So.
And then what happened after you got your breath back from all the hilarious
all the hilarity,
fart?
I was done crying. The guy says, the one that farted, he's like, you should have seen yourself. I swear you pissed yourself. And he goes to piss. He goes to
he walks back over. He like laughs for a minute.
Yeah, he's like, oh, there's nothing out there. I was just fucking with you.
And then he walks back over towards the horses to take a piss.
And the other guy's like, I think there is something out there. And he's like, do you think I'm an idiot? Because, he just got that guy. So that, And that's when the guy's like, no, there's something out there. And all we see is Grey Wind's face.
And then he...
Yeah. And then we see Robb and the guys, and then it's like them marching towards the camp.
It's pretty much just showing that Robb's surprise attacking the Lannister camp and he's about to fuck him up.
Yeah, and as it fades to black, all we hear is just them keep chanting King of the North, King of the North. So we cut to the aftermatter of what just happened. There's dead men, either dead or dying, kind of everywhere. There's Silent Sisters helping the wounded men. Robb is walking through with Roose Bolton and some other men.
This is our first introduction to Bruce Bolton.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Roose. R-O-O-S-E.
Lord Bolton.
Lord Bolton. He's telling Robb that they don't have anywhere to keep the prisoners that they have. He says that there's 5 Lannisters dead for every one of theirs, and that, the men that they captured, they don't really have places to put them, and that they barely have food to feed their own, much less these other men. And Roose is kind of telling Robb, like, you should flay these men and get some information out of them and then just discard them.
Yeah.
And Robb's like, that's not the way we do stuff. And Roose is like, a naked man it has few secrets, but a flayed man has none. And Robb's like, my father outlawed flaying. We don't do that.
Yeah, we don't play that shit.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, we're not in the North.
Yeah, exactly. So then Roose tells him that the high road is very pretty, but it's hard. You'll have a hard time marching your men down it. And Robb says, look, I'm not giving the Lannisters any more reason to abuse my sisters, even flaying their men, because that's just going to piss them off. As they're walking through the men, there's a guy who has like an ankle injury. It's like his foot.
His foot is like split wide open.
Yeah, it's definitely like it needs to be taken. And there's 2 women. There's a silent sister and then just this woman helping. And they're telling him, look, we have to take your foot. And he's like, I don't want to be a cripple.
No. Don't take it.
Yeah. So
I like that foot.
Yeah, I like it. It's my favorite foot. So Rob comes over, he holds the man down to, help the women out. Roose comes up and he's like, look, your men need more attention than this guy because he's a Lannister.
He was opposite team.
Yeah, and Rob's like, I'm not even listening to you anymore. He holds the guy down, tells him to bite on the thing, and the woman starts sawing off the foot.
Which is just the fucking worst.
Yeah.
Just the worst sound. That shit gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, but Rob is clearly into the woman, so he looks past the heebie-jeebies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She's a looker.
She is a looker. So after that's done, Rob tries to talk to her. He asks what her name is. She says to Lisa. And she's pretty pissy.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's clearly pissy because she doesn't think this war is necessary.
Which no war is necessary, but people make it more necessary by chopping people's heads off and such.
Exactly. So she said that boy lost a foot on your orders, and he was like, "Look, we have to fight. They took my father's head." And she's like, "That boy did? I know he didn't. He was a fisherman's son."
Oh, come on now.
Yeah, and he was like,
are we going to play this game?
Yeah, and so Rob's like, look, I have no hatred for the lad. And she's like, oh, great. I'm sure that'll help his foot grow back.
Oh, you're just being difficult.
Pretty much. Rob's like, I understand why you're pissy, but you have to see it from our side. This is the honor. They took my father's head. Like, they're going to keep doing these things. They're going to run the realm into the ground. And he's like, I'm not doing it for the Iron Throne. He's like, I have no interest in sitting it. And she's like, so who does? Like, what's going to happen? And he's like, well, we have to win the war before we can look at that. And she's like, why even fight if there's not even an outcome, if you don't know what's going to happen?
Yeah, if you don't know what's going to happen after that. It's like, well, I know what's going to happen if I just sit at home.
Yeah. So he's like, where are you from? And she says, Volantis. And he says, well, the boy was lucky you were here. And as she's riding off on a cart, she, of course, has to have the last word. And she says, yeah, he was unlucky you were.
And then he kind of smiles because he's like, ooh, witty. I like her. / she was kind of saying that I'm a badass.
Yeah, exactly. So there's clearly something there. Rob is intrigued, and this woman is the only person pushing back.
I thought you said...
The only pussy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the only pussy out here right now.
As soon as I accidentally almost said the wrong word, I knew you were going to think I said pussy.
Alrighty, onward.
So we cut to Joffrey. He's holding a crossbow. And he's holding it at Sansa. He's up on the throne, but she's like down on the floor.
Yeah, there's like people around. Mm-hmm. Why are there always like
people
who
at court?
Are the like? Yeah, there's like there'll always be like some women, and then like
they're like the lords and ladies of King's Landing.
Okay, so they're like the higher.
Yeah, they're not regent. They're not part of the royal family.
Yeah, but they have like.
Yeah.
Do they have like maybe smaller castles?
It would be like these would be like, so if you take the English royal family, like the Queen and like Prince Harry, and it would be like Prince Harry's like aunt, who would be like a duchess somewhere.
I got you.
Yeah, it's like those people.
So just all the higher ups, big wigs of the city.
So they're not the common folk.
Because you see the random people. They all look like they have money.
Yeah, they're the people of court.
Got it.
Yeah, so they're the ones that are like, they get invited to things. They're the ones that are at the weddings.
So they're just like, hey, just throwing this invite out there. I'm going to be holding a crossbow at Sansa around lunchtime if you want to come by.
Pretty much. He's holding court. And,
it's going to be humiliating.
Yeah, definitely. That's why you don't see common folk in that. That's why they would do something in the Sept, so the common folk would see that. That's why Ned lost his head in the Sept as opposed to... Yeah, exactly.
The big show.
So... Joffrey is telling Sansa that she's there to answer for her brother's latest treason, or his latest treasons. Your traitor brother's treasons.
And she's like, bitch, I can't fucking do anything about that.
Yeah.
It's not my fault.
And he said, he's like, well, he's your blood. And that's when, of course, Lancel is like trying to play it up, and he's like, the northern men killed them and then feasted on the flesh of the slain men.
Yeah, he's like playing to the room.
Yeah, exactly. Joffrey's saying like, I should kill you for this, but my mother insists on keeping you alive.
To send a message to your brother, I should kill you.
Yeah, so he's like, we have to send a message a different way. So he tells Meryn Trant, he says, leave her face, I like her pretty.
And he sucks her ass in the stomach.
Mm-hmm. And Joff is clearly into it.
Yeah, and then he starts like pistol whipping her with his sword.
Yeah, and that's when Joffrey tells her he tells Meryn that Sansa's she's overdressed. And so that's when Meryn like rips her dress down the back.
Cuts the first of 9 layers off.
Yeah, definitely. And when that happens, Joffrey says, if we want Robb Stark to hear us, you're going to have to speak louder.
Yeah, and he's like really starting to get really fucking intense.
Yeah, and that's when Tyrion enters. And he says, what's the meaning of this? And then he turns to Meryn and he says, what kind of knight beats a girl? And Meryn's like, I'm just doing what I was ordered.
With his shit face.
Yeah. And of course, the whole time, every time Meryn is...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, every time Meryn is speaking to Tyrion, he calls him imp.
I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah. So
he calls him imp at the end of that.
Yeah, he's like trying to, provoke him. And that's when Bronn is like, oh, hang on. We wouldn't want to get blood all over your pretty white cloak.
Yeah, he's like, easy now. We don't want to get blood on your gear there. Yeah.
So then Tyrion...
God, I just love that so hard. This scene fucking so goes. Hard. When they come in... Oh, love this shit.
I do too.
Those two...
Perfect.
The best.
So Tyrion says, he says... somebody cover the girl. So the Hound walks up to Sansa and just rips off his white cloak.
Yeah.
And puts it across her. And that's when the whole time, and Tyrion's like talking to Joffrey, and he's like, look, you can't do this and all this stuff. And that's when Meryn's like, Joffrey says, you can't talk to me like that. I'm a king and I can do what I want. And Tyrion's like, no, you can't. You can't just do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's what the Mad King said.
Yeah. And so he's like, that's what the Mad King said. Has your Uncle Jaime ever told you what happened to the Mad King? And that's when Meryn Trant's like, you can't threaten the king. And he's like, I'm not threatening the king. I'm educating him.
No, I'm educating my nephew.
Yeah, I'm not threatening him. I'm educating my nephew. And that's when Tyrion says, the next time Sir Meryn speaks, kill him. And then he goes, that was a threat.
That's a
See
threat.
the difference?
Oh, God damn. I love that so much.
I do too. So then Tyrion walks over to Sansa. He holds out a hand to her. She stands, and he goes to escort her out. He apologizes. He says, I apologize for my nephew's behavior. That pisses Joffrey off even more.
Oh, hell yeah.
And so as they're walking out, Tyrion, in a whisper, he asks, Lady Sansa, would you like to end this engagement? And Sansa says, I'm loyal to Joffrey, my one true love. Because, of course, she doesn't trust him yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, that's good.
Yeah. So she walks ahead of him, and that's when Tyrion stops, and he goes, Lady Stark, you may survive us yet.
Yeah. That's good. Just keep playing the game.
Yeah. So then Bronn walks up, and he tells Tyrion, look, I think the little king is backed up. And, maybe we should get some of that poison out of him. And Tyrion's like, you think that'll cure him?
And he made the perfect analogy. He said that he doesn't have anything to do all day. So
he
just picks wings off flies.
Yeah. And so Tyrion says, do you think that'll cure him? And Bronn says, there's no cure for being a cunt.
So true, and such a Bronn thing to say.
Yep. So we cut to the Hound. He's waiting outside of Joffrey's chambers. Joffrey walks up, and he's like, what are you doing here? And it's like, hey, man, chill out. He's just standing there.
Yeah.
And so the Hound's like, your uncle left you your name day present and asked that I see that you got it. And Joffrey's like, well, what is it? He's like, just look inside.
Yeah.
Go inside. So that's when he goes in. It's two whores. One's Rosalind. She walks up to him and she says, "We're your name day gift." And he's like, "Well, my name day's passed." And she's like, "Okay, well, we won't tell if you won't.
Yeah.
If you don't." Joffrey's not into her touching him, again on your gay theory there.
Oh, he's super gay.
Yeah. And so he finally tells...
And sadistic.
Oh, definitely. He finally tells Rosalind to go touch the other girl. They start like, she takes, the one girl stands up, takes off her clothes. Rosalind starts kissing her stomach. And he's like, can you hit her? So they kind of smirk and the girl turns over and Rosalind starts like lightly spanking the girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's when Joffrey asks, and he goes, oh, so my uncle sent you. And Rosalind says, yes, my grace, he chose us himself. And Joffrey stands up, he takes off his like belt and hands it to Rosalind and says, use this. And so she hits the girl with it, and he's like, harder. And so she hits a little harder.
A little harder.
And that's when Joffrey grabs Rosalind like by her face. And it was like, I said harder. Do you want my uncle to get his money's worth? And so that's when Rosalind
really lays into her.
Yeah. And she hits the girl several more times before the girl finally just like is enough. She just crawls away and starts crying, like whimpering on the other side of the bed.
Yeah.
So the Joffrey walks back to the table and he picks up like a staff.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly.
It's like a heavy wooden. It looks like it's like a.
It's like some band leader shit.
The kings like carry them, but normally it's like more medieval than like where we are here.
What's the thing you pass off when you're racing? What's that called?
A torch.
No.
When you're racing? Oh, I don't know.
I feel like that's what it is.
Yeah, it's something similar. That's what
you don't
I'm
know
saying.
what that's called?
No.
Were you in track?
Yeah, I ran cross country. I don't know what it's called.
All right, whatever.
Anyway, it's like a staff. That's what he has.
It's like the thing they have in Ninja Turtles 3.
Yeah, and it has like a ornate thing on top. And so he says, he hands it to Rosalind. She says, too much pain will spoil the pleasure. And the whole time he's just not even saying
anything.
Paying
attention.
He's just tightening the crossbow and like loading it again. And he finally is done loading it and points it at Rosalind, and he says, she says, well, what if your uncle finds out? And he's like, I want him to find out. You're going to bring her to his chambers after you're done and show him what you've done. And if not, the same thing will happen to you.
Yikes.
And that's when he says, begin, and she hits the girl. And like,
God, how hard would that be for her? Because you know how much of a sweetie she is. She was in there crying about that girl's baby being murdered. So, like, imagine her having to just beat this girl almost to death.
Yeah. And so you hear the girl cry in, like, severe pain.
Ugh.
And the scene ends with Joffrey saying harder.
Yeah.
He's an asshole. We see Renly's camp. Littlefinger's there. Renly is like, oh, my favorite whoremonger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, oh, so now you do the Lannisters bidding, huh? So let me ask you, was my brother's body even cold before you started doing, before you switched teams, And Littlefinger says he's a practical man. And Renly's like, oh, practical man, just not a loyal one. And then he's like, look, Lord Baelish, I don't like you. I don't like your face. I don't like the words that ooze out of your mouth.
I don't like your face.
And he's like, I don't want you here one more moment than necessary. So tell me what you want. And that's when Littlefinger looks at Brienne, and Renly's like, you can trust Brienne. Her trust comes unwarranted.
Yeah, free of charge.
Free of charge. So Littlefinger says that Renly still has many friends at court, and many think that Ned erred by not holding his claim and taking up Stannis's. And that's when Renly is like, oh, I understand now. If the city falls, you want to retain your position. Oh, in your head.
Yeah.
And Littlefinger's like, the priority is on my head.
Yeah, I'll take the head first, please.
Yeah, so Littlefinger says, look, what I'm trying to offer you is two options. You can show up in the gates and think that you're going to have to hold a siege, or you can show up and you'll have the gates open.
Yeah, the door will be open for you. Yeah.
So after that conversation, we see Littlefinger waiting outside of the king's tent, clearly waiting outside. And Marjorie walks up, and Littlefinger, like, kind of, saunters over to her, and he's like, I'm not sure which tent is mine, and could you help me? And Marjorie's like, yeah, it does take a while. And she's like, it seems like the moment I find which tin is mine, we move again.
And she's wearing a punch/popcorn bowl as a dress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very weird looking.
Yeah, it's quite weird.
Not flattering.
No. Littlefinger says, oh, you said your tent. You don't share a tent with the king? It's not our tent? It seems like Loras just went into the tent with the king. And she's like, yeah, the Kingsguard's place is with the king.
Yeah.
Beside him.
Yeah.
Doing his bidding. And Littlefinger's like, oh, well, question, on your wedding night, were you there? Or was that Loras again? I'm quite confused because most people said that you weren't there by his side on your wedding night. Clearly digging into,
pushing
hey, he's gay, right?
And also, she's not stupid, so.
Yeah. So she's like, you ask a lot of questions about my marriage. And he's like, well, your marriage is quite interesting. And she was like, well, clearly you've never been married, right? And Littlefinger says, well, I've been unlucky in my affections. And she's like, okay, well, it seems like the whole notion of marriage confuses you. Let me clarify. My husband is my king and my king is my husband. I don't ask questions.
There you have it.
And she's like, this is your tent. And she walks off.
Peace.
Yeah. So Marjorie clearly knows the game.
And never wear that dress again.
Yeah, never. So we cut to the Red Waste. A rider rides up on a horse to Danny Camp. It's the rider, one of the riders she sent
alive,
off.
has his head.
And he has a different horse.
Yeah.
And so he says, the 13 gave it to me. They're from Karth. And she's like, Koth. And she's like, what is that? And he's like, well, they have the honor to receive the Mother of Dragons. So they want us to come. And so she looks at Jorah and she's like, you know anything about this? And he's like, the only thing I know is that the desert around the Karth's walls is called the Garden of Bones. And if they shut their gates on you, that garden grows.
Yeah.
So basically it's like Karth or nothing.
Yeah.
That's what we got here.
What about the third rider?
I don't think he ever comes back.
We don't. Okay. Well, I guess yeah. I guess because
if he does, they moved on.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They've moved on. So he's just like, I found this really dope spot, but he found this ill place to go, but no one's there. So I guess you just turn around and go back.
Yeah. You're just like, all right, well, I guess I'll go.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Or you travel onward, even though you probably know that Karth is your only option.
Or it's a bummer that you choose to go in the other direction, which makes your head come off.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want that direction.
Alrighty.
So we cut to Harrenhal.
Which looks baked.
It does look baked. It's Arya and Gendry and Hot Pie. They're chained and being brought over, and they look up and Gendry says, carved of fire, not stone. And that's when Arya says it's carved of dragon fire. And
the finest of the fires.
Yeah. And
only the finest breast milks.
The finest breast milks.
Curtis, wait, you may throw yours away?
No, I'm still sipping. They say that all the dragons are Gendry says all the dragons are dead. Because I think Hot Pie's like, oh, are we gonna see a dragon? So then Hot Pie's like, what's that smell? And Arya's like, dead people.
Yeah, because she's familiar with that. Yeah. He should be too.
Yeah. So just a little bit about Harrenhal, because I know you asked, and it's interesting. And some people might not.
Yeah, I had remembered it, but it's been a while since we watched the show, but so I couldn't remember who it belonged to.
Okay, so Harrenhal, it was built by Harren the Black, who was one of the original houses in the Seven Kingdoms before the conquering happened, Aegon's conquering, before the Targaryens came.
Got it.
So they had basically wanted to build Harrenhal is the greatest of all castles in Westeros, and they were making it so it was basically impregnable. You couldn't get in if they didn't want you to.
Pre-dragon.
Yeah. The construction of Harrenhal took 40 years. Thousands of captive people were put and enslaved to work. They were chained to sledges or labored in the 5 huge castles, and most of them died. They said that men in the winter froze, and they, it was sweltering in the summer. Again, they weren't kept well because they were enslaved people, so nobody gave a shit about them. So thousands died while building this over
Work
40
until
years.
You're dead.
There were weirwoods, so the face trees.
Yeah.
They cut all of them down to which, and those trees had stood for 3,000 years or whatever. And they were cut down to provide rafters and beams for the castle. And so it was basically meant to be this big, huge, like, you know, best castle ever. They took down all of the lands. They basically reaped the riverlands of all of the stuff that they had to put all of these ornate ideas and stuff into this castle. It finally was completed. The day Harren the Black took up residency, the day it was completed, it took 40 years to complete. The day he moves in, Aegon the Conqueror comes.
Oh, ain't that about a bitch? He was probably just like, I'm gonna wait till he finishes.
Yeah.
He just keeps coming by, and there's like still like backhoes and shit out there, and he's like, oh, they're almost done.
They're almost done.
I'm gonna wait.
Yeah. So, of course, Harren was like, well, it's impregnable, so I don't have to bow to Aegon the Conqueror because you can't take my castle. You're never gonna take my castle. The problem is that Harren had never dealt with dragons.
Not so much.
Yeah, and so the dragons were not obstructed by the high walls because they could fly over them. They basically flew in and roasted Harren alive in the tallest of the towers. And the entire Harren line
wiped out
that day. And due to the extreme heat of the dragon fire, the castle took on a charred, like melted appearance. So since then, it's become basically the White Castle. It's the most expensive castle to maintain. So only the richest people are given it. And most of the time, people think it's cursed or haunted because of all the horrors that happened. So Harrenhal is like considered this cursed place.
And it looks awful.
Yeah, it looks awful. It's not a place that people really like.
Just a big hot mess.
Yeah. So again, that doesn't really pertain to this part of the story, but
Still
it's an interesting. Yeah. They're all Arya, Hot Pie, Gentry, and all the other guys are lit into the Harrenhal like stocks, I guess. Basically, they're just like kind of chained up where they are.
Yeah.
And there's like they're not really in any cell. There's no roof. They're just being pushed out in the weather, chained to a fence. People are being tortured. For information. Basically, everyone's like averting their eyes not to be chosen next, but there's one woman who's just staring while this guy's screaming. Everyone else is just kind of looking down, not watching, and the guy screams, and then he finally dies. And once he dies, the woman who's just staring goes, "He's dead. He was my son." And then she says, "My sister was 3 days ago, my husband the day before that."
Shit.
And that's when Arya's like, so they take someone every day, and they're like, does anyone live? And
does it seem like it?
It doesn't seem like it. So we hear that night, Arya, everyone's sleeping, Arya starts her list. Yeah, and so she says Joffrey, Cersei, Inland Payne, the Hound.
Death list.
Yep. So we cut to Catelyn. Littlefinger is there, and she's like, "How dare you?" And Littlefinger's like, "You might have heard false reports. I didn't betray Ned." And it's
easy.
Yeah. We all know you did. And so Catelyn says, "I trusted you. My husband trusted you, and you repaid our faith with treachery." Littlefinger, he tries to like grab her and like profess his love for her.
Which is a bad move. I thought you were smart.
Yeah, Catelyn's over it. She pulls a knife on him. And she's like, "Have you lost your fucking mind?"
No, I'm about to cut your dick off, bro.
So she yells at him. She tells him to get out. And he is just like, still tries to talk her down. She's like, "Get out." And then he tries one last Hail Mary. And he says, "Do you want to see your girls again?" And of course she does.
It's her weak spot.
Yeah. And so she goes, "You have Arya too?"
And lying, he says,
"Both girls are healthy and safe for now." And he's like, "But you know the queen, and you know Joffrey, and I fear for their longevity if they stay in the castle. I want to help you get them out." And Catelyn's
Stanza!
Catelyn, of course, being, in my opinion, stupid, but I guess she is a mother. She lets her guard down and lets him in, and she stands down. She puts the knife down, and she's like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "I think that we can do a Lannister trade with your daughters for Jaime." And she's like, "Yeah,
Rob's not doing that.
Rob's not going to do that. And he's like, well, I'm not bringing terms to Rob. I'm bringing them to you. And she's like, he's not going to go for that. And he's like, what he doesn't know, just do it. And he's like, look, you may not get a second chance. So consider it. And so Littlefinger says, I have a gift for you. And this whole time, Catelyn has her back to him. And he's like, look, it's a token of Tyrion's goodwill. He wants you to know he exchanges these terms, the Jaime for Sansa and Arya.
Yeah, this is
in good faith.
In good faith.
Yeah. So there's two silent sisters. They bring in a box. That's when Catelyn turns around. They sit down the box. She's like, what's this? Obviously, it's Ned's bones.
Yeah.
And Littlefinger says, your husband was an honorable man. He should rest with his ancestors in the crypts beneath Winterfell. And Catelyn doesn't say anything but get out.
Yeah.
Again.
Well, it's probably a pretty heavy moment for her.
Yeah. So he walks out. She looks at the bones for another moment, has, a brief moment to herself, and then she shuts the box. So we cut back to Harrenhal. All of the prisoners are being woken up by the Lannister men. The Mountain Inners, Hot Pie says,
staring at him.
Yeah. And he's like, he points to the guy beside him. He's like, hey, he said that he stares at the mountain every day. And he's like, if you stare at him, we won't pick you. So this guy and Hot Pie are the two like standing at the gate, and they're both staring at the mountain. Everyone else has either got their back in averted eyes or just averted eyes.
Yeah.
The mountain looks at Hot Pie, looks at the other guy, and then points at the other guy and goes, You. Yeah. So
Hot Pie's like, that doesn't work.
Yeah. So that clearly doesn't work because that guy finally gets picked and Hot Pie pisses himself.
For real.
Yeah. The guy's tied to a chair and they start interrogating him. They're like, is there gold and silver? Where's the Brotherhood? He's like, I don't know. The guy takes a rat and puts it in this bucket that's got straps on it and straps it to the guy who's strapped to the chair, straps it to his chest. Or to like his stomach, chest area. So he's like, again, the guy asks, where's the Brotherhood? He's like, I don't know. And he's like, where's the Brotherhood? And he's like, I don't know. I already told you. And the guy's like, which of the villagers aided him? And this whole time, this guy takes a torch and is lighting the end of the bucket.
So the rat has one direction to go, and that's through this dude.
Yeah. And so, and you can hear the rat like freaking out, and the guy's begging him to stop.
He's like, whoa, he's starting to do something.
Yeah. And so finally the guy who is strapped to the chair gives in, and he gives up the butcher and his son. He's like, the villagers that helped were the butcher and his son.
Ugh.
And
yikes.
Doesn't matter. The guy's still lighting the end of the bucket, and the rat finally eats through the guy's stomach, and he dies. So then that night we see Arya again. We hear her again. Joffrey, Cersei, Ilyn Payne, the Hound. And then I think it's that same woman, right? That from earlier, whose husband and brother.
I thought they're just like woken up by like them being like, get up.
No, that was before.
Oh.
She begs Polliver specifically. She says, Polliver, please, can we have some food or
the
water?
Woman. Yeah.
And so after he pushes her down and
socks her in the stomach.
Yeah, and so that's when we hear Arya add two names to the list. Polliver and the Mountain. Yeah, so now we have Joffrey, Cersei, Ilyn Payne, the Hound, Polliver, and the Mountain. Stacking
up.
Yeah. So we cut to Stannis and Renly. They're meeting. Catelyn is with Renly. So Renly's like, I almost didn't recognize you. What's with your banner? And he's like, well, I guess if we had the same one, it would be really confusing. Yeah. So he's like, so then he's like, why is your stag on fire? And that's when Melisandre pipes up, and she's like, oh, because he is chosen to, take the Lord of Light.
Also, Renly's flags are adorable. They kind of look like Snoopy.
Yeah, they're very adorable.
I'm like, well, that doesn't look fierce at all.
Not
Those
at all.
look precious coming towards me.
Very precious. I would not want to fight you.
Hey guys, there's a bunch of guys coming over here to give us hugs and shit.
Yeah. and do a fun dance.
100,000 men heading our way to give us all hugs.
I love it. So that's when Renly is like, oh, you must be the fire priestess. And then he turns back to Stanley and he goes, Stannis. And he says, now I understand why you found religion in your old age.
Yeah, no shit. And he's like, easy.
Yeah. And so that's when Melisandre says, you should kneel to your brother. He's the lord that was chosen. And Catelyn is like, she intertwines and she's like, look, I should knock your heads together and lock you in a room until you realize you're brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being the mother.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so then Stannis is like, oh, I'm surprised to see you here, Catelyn, on my brother's side. And
when your husband was like, yeah, I'm the rightful heir.
Yeah. And so that's when Stannis is like, yeah, I mean, your husband stood with me. And so, you know, what's going on here? And Renly's like, look, the whole realm denies that you should be king. No one wants you to be king. You never wanted any friends, and a man without friends is a man without power. So, you know, I'm giving you a chance here. I have all the friends. I have all the men. I have all of what I need. You need to side with me. I'm not stepping down to you. And Stannis is like, look, I'll give you one night, Renly. I'll give you one night for our mother's sake. But come dawn, if you're not there,
I'm going to have to fuck you up.
Yeah. And he's like, look, if you're here before dawn, I'll grant you a seat on the council, and I'll name you my heir until my son is born.
Yeah.
And then he's like, otherwise, come dawn, I'll destroy you.
Fair enough.
Renly says, look, I have all these bannermen. And Renly's like, what's a few cloths? And he's like, all of those cloths are held by men, and those men will help make me king. And Stanley's like, well, Stanley, I keep saying Stanley.
Did I stutter?
So Stannis is like, yeah, we'll see. So that's when Melisandre says, look to your sins, Lord Renly. The night is dark and full of terrors. And Stannis and all of his men ride off, and that's when Renly says, if you can believe it, I used to love him once.
Yeah. It seems a little choked up.
Yeah.
He's like,
because he knows he has to kill his brother. Yeah. So we cut to Dany. She's outside of Qarth. Qarth. There's soldiers walking up, and she's like, I thought we were welcome. And Jorah's like, well, there's a Dothraki horde outside their gates. They're not going to just come unprotected.
Yeah, and she looks at him, she's like, horde?
Yeah. It's like,
there's like 25 of us.
Yeah.
And we all look like shit.
Yeah, and most of us are women. So that's when the 13 approach, and she goes to announce herself, and that's when he's like, we know Daenerys of House Targaryen, and you know,
plumpy fat guy.
Yeah, and so she's like, you know me, my lord? And he's like, oh, I'm no lord, I'm just a humble merchant. And he's like, they call you the mother of dragons. And she's like, what's your name? And he's like, my name is quite long and quite impossible to pronounce. And he's like, I'm just a spice trader. But he's like,
a spice girl.
Yeah, I'm just a spice girl. Posh spice. He says, if you want to be my lover. He's like, we're the 13, and this is Qarth, the greatest city that was or will be. And she goes to say that Qarth is very beautiful. She says the name of the city wrong.
Yeah, she says Quarth, like she's saying quarrels.
Yeah, and he's like, Qarth. And that clearly throws her off. And then he asks if they can see the dragons. And she's like, I'll show you them once my people are fed and we've had water. And he's like, forgive me, but no man alive has seen a dragon, and some believe that your children may not exist. We'd like to see for ourselves before we let you in the gates. And she's like, I'm not a liar. And he was like,
fair enough.
That's fine, but we've never met you before, so we trust your word with limited value, and we're just asking this one thing. And she said, well, where I come from, people are treated with respect. And he's says,
like, well, take your ass back there then.
Pretty much. And she's like, you said you would receive me. And he was like, and I have. And I
am currently doing that.
Yeah. And she's like, well, you know, what if you don't let us in, we'll starve. And he was like, well, we'll deeply regret your death. But Qarth hasn't been the greatest city just by letting anyone through our gates. And that's when she goes, 13. When my dragons are grown, we will take back what was stolen from me, and we will take what is due to me. Turn us away, and we'll burn you first. And that's when Home Dude's like, oh, you're a true Targaryen.
You're fired up.
But as you said a moment ago, if we don't let you in, you're going to die.
So I'm not too concerned.
Yeah. And so that's when the tall dude's like, you retreat in fear of a little girl. And I forgot his name is all stupid. It sounds like he says Duckworth name at the end.
Yeah, it's like Duck Soup or something.
It's Zara
Duck Soup.
Zara Duck Soup. It's Zaro Zahana Dakas, I think is how you're supposed to say it. We'll just call him.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Duck Soup.
We'll call him Duck Soup.
But go ahead.
Okay. Well, Duck Soup is like, I can't believe you fear this little girl. And the home dude, fat dude, Spice Girl is like, he's like,
okay, everybody on board. We're talking about right now. We're talking about Duck Soup and Spice Girl. So, we're back at it.
Yeah. So Spice Girl says that girl threatens to burn our city to the ground, and you want to invite her in for tea. And Duck Soup is like, look, I'm a savage from the Summer Islands, and you let me in, and Karth still stands.
It's a savage soup.
So yeah, he's savage. So that's when Spice Girl's like, well, our decision is final. And Duck Soup is like, I'm going to invoke Samir, I think is what he says.
Something like that.
I guess it's a like, blood promise.
Or it's kind of like, I can override. This is a blood promise, so I can override everyone, but if it goes south, you can kill me. It's probably something along those lines. That's what it seems like, yeah.
So he cuts his hand, shows it, and says, I'll vouch for her, her people, and dragons in accordance with the law. And that's when Spice Girl's like, well, it's your head.
Yeah.
And then Duck Soup says, welcome to Karth, my lady. Yeah.
Right on.
My lady. Matuna. So we cut back to Harrenhal. The kid who the rat just ate through his stomach is getting his head put on a spike.
Hammered down onto a spike.
Yeah, like that's necessary. We see they're picking again for the new day.
Yep.
And Gentry's picked.
You.
Gentry gets strapped to the chair. They start, going through the
rat bucket procedure.
He's like, is there gold or silver? He says, I'm not from the village. They are like, who's with the Brotherhood? He's like, I don't even know what that means. And they're getting ready to strap the rat thing to him. And right then, that's when Tywin enters. And I wrote, and Tywin comes to save the day.
Yeah, comes in with a large presence.
Yes. And so he walks over to where the mountain is and all the other guys.
Fake-ass early season mountain.
Oh, yeah, fake mountain.
Give us that real juiced-up mountain.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. And he's like, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, you can tell. Looks like shit here.
Yeah, and so he walks around and he's like, why are these prisoners not in cells? And the guy's like, oh, we didn't have any more room. Doesn't matter. They won't be here very long. And so then that's when Tywin's like, oh, are we so well equipped with men that we can discard able bodies and people that can actually work? And so he points to Gentry and he's like, do you have a trade? And that's when Gentry's like, yeah, I'm a smith.
And Tywin looks over, he's like, oh, a smith. So someone that could be incredibly useful right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, let's just chew a hole through him.
Yeah. So that's when Arya, of course, is staring directly at Tywin because she knows who he is.
Yeah.
And the one guy's like, what are you looking at? And he's like, kneel or I'll carve your lungs out, boy. And that's when Tywin walks over and he goes, no, you won't. And this one's not a boy. It's a girl dressed as a boy. And he asks Arya why she's dressed as a boy. And she says it's safer to travel because she's a smart girl.
Yeah, well, and she was told that.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. But she remembers those things. And so that's when Tywin says,
she's smart.
Yeah, he's like, get these men, get them doing something. And he's like, also bring the girl. I need a new cupbearer. Yeah, and Arya's like,
bring that girl. I need a human to hold my cup.
Yeah. And Arya's, like, oh, great. That's the last person I want to be around.
Yeah, for sure.
So Tyrion is in his study. He gets a knock at the door. It's Lancel. He's acting just like Meryn Trant. He's calling him an imp and like talking shit to him, and
for
clearly
some reason,
thinks he's above.
He has this chip on his shoulder. He thinks that Cersei will take care of him if something goes bad. Yeah,
so he says he has a royal warrant to command Tyrion to release Pycelle. Tyrion says, thanks. He takes the warrant, doesn't even look at it,
throws
it on the table, and asks Lancel to come in for a drink. And he's like,
I'm not here to drink with you.
Yeah. And so he was like, oh, it's interesting. I would expect if Cersei was so concerned for Pycelle, she would have come herself. And he's like, you know, she's got other things to do. And Tyrion's like, you know, so you receive your instructions directly from her, and so what took you so long to bring them to me? And Lannister's like, well, when I'm given an instruction, I carry it out without delay. And he's like, oh, it's interesting that Cersei trusts you so much to allow her in her chambers during the hour of the wolf. And that's when Lancel's like,
yikes.
Shit.
It appears that you know something.
You have cracked this code. So Lancel, still trying to hold on, is like, well, she often works from dusk to dawn. And that's when Tyrion's like, oh, well, she must be glad to have you from dusk to dawn, you know, waiting on her every, issue and want. And he walks past Lancel, and that's when he's like, oh, lavender oil. Cersei's always loved lavender oil. And so that's when Lancel's like, you can't talk to me like that. I'm a knight. And he's like, oh, yeah, an anointed knight. And he's like, did she anoint you before or after she took you into her bed?
Hey.
And that's when Tyrion is like, so Lancel, have you ever thought about what Joffrey would have to say if he knew you bedded his mother?
Uh-oh.
And that's when Lancel's like, everything I've done, it was on Tywin's word. He told me to obey every single thing that Cersei said. And that's when Tyrion's like, oh, did my father tell you to fuck her too?
I doubt it.
Yeah. And so he's like, you know what? It must have been terrible to have to deal with her and listen to this. Let me go get Joffrey and we can all talk about this. And that's when Lancel's like, I'll leave the city at once. Just, I beg you not to tell Joffrey. And Tyrion's like, no, I don't think you'll leave the city. No. My father told you to obey my sister, and you will. Obey her, stay by her side, keep her pleasured. As long as you keep faith with me, tell me everything she does and everything she says, then no one else has to know what's going on.
And now you're my mole.
Yes. Mole?
Mole.
So he says, yes, my lord, I will, I swear it is your command. And that's when Tyrion's like, rise and let us drink to our understanding.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, you don't have a cup. And then Lancel's fucking out of there.
Yeah.
Very uncomfortable.
But before that, he says, smile, cousin. My sister is a beautiful woman, and it's all for the good of the realm.
That's right.
And
that's
at
least
when,
you're making it with a hot chick.
Yeah. And that's when Lancel's like, what about her demand? And Tyrion's like, oh, Pycelle? Sure. I'll release him in the morning. And he's like, just like that? And he's like, yeah, he just can't serve on the council. And then Tyrion's like, I would say I haven't harmed a hair on his head, but that's not necessarily true.
And then Lancel's like, looks worried. He's like, oh, what did you do?
What's that mean?
I just fucked him up a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. So we see Stannis. He's on a ship. It's night. Davos comes up, and that's when Stannis asks him, he's like, do you have to do the knuckle bones around your neck bring you luck?
Yeah, he has like a little pouch of knuckle bones.
Yeah, and so Davos says, well, it reminds me that I have 4 less fingernails to clean. And that's when Stannis corrects him and says 4 fewer. And he's like, why do you wear them? And Davos says, well, it reminds me of where I came from, and it reminds me of my punishment. And he's like, it was an honest punishment, and you were good with a cleaver. So Stannis says, you were a hero and a smuggler. But one good act doesn't wash out the bad, and the bad doesn't wash out the good. So basically it's saying that there's good and bad in Davos.
Which she says different later.
Yeah. Well, Stannis says this, she says something different.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, it is interesting. So then they start talking about, Davos says, well, because of your punishment, it's made me raise my son in a better light. And he's like, you know, he would do anything to serve you. And then he's like, also, if the Red Woman told my son to leap from the crow's nest, he would. And that's when Stannis is like, she has a name. And he's like, okay, whatever. And he's like, what do you want from me? And Stannis says, I want you to be a smuggler tonight. And that's when Davos is like, what am I bringing ashore? And Stannis says, the Red Woman. And no one must know what you're doing, and you must not speak of it. And Davos
says...
he's,
like, kind of pushing against it. Do you think he knows... I mean, how would he have any idea?
No, I think he knows magic is being used.
Okay, I guess he knows that there's just some dark shit going on.
So Davos says that there's better ways, cleaner ways to handle this, and Stannis says, well, look, cleaner ways don't win wars.
Yeah, and I'm outnumbered like a mofo. I was just talking some shit back there to my brother, but it's completely empty.
Yeah. So we see Davos and Melisandre just in a little boat. He's rowing them to the mainland.
It looks like they aren't moving.
Yeah, at all. She asks she goes, are you afraid, Onion Knight? And he says, well, someone once told me that the night is dark and full of terrors.
And she smiles.
Yeah. And she's like, you've carried unpleasant cargo in your time. You shouldn't be really that worried about things. And she asks him if he's a good man. And he says, well, I'm parts of both. I'm mixed. And she's like, well, if half an onion is black, it's a rotten onion.
Yeah.
You can't be both.
So the opposite of what...
Yeah.
Or not complete opposite, but just different than what
Stannis
said to him.
Stannis is saying you can have both, and she's saying you can't.
Yeah.
And he asks if she's good, and she's like, or he asks if she's good or bad, and he's like, oh, good.
Oh, good. Good as fuck.
She says, I'm a knight of sorts myself. I'm a champion of the Lord of Light. And she asks if Davos loves his wife, and he says, I do. And she's like, but you've known other women. And he doesn't say anything. And she's like me, take me for instance. You want me. And
he just kind of looks. He's like, well, I am a man.
Yeah, and you
are a really hot chick.
Yeah. And she says, you want to see what's beneath these robes, and you will.
And you will. And then she walks away. It's like, and he's like, well, I will follow you now.
Yeah. I am very much intrigued.
Intriguing.
So they walk up they're like walking through this cave, and we see a gated area at the bottom. And
clearly this is like an old path that he knew of, and now it's
because he says their bars weren't there before.
Yeah.
And they are at they're going to the Stormlands. So yeah. Sorry, think about something else. So he says that those bars weren't there before, and so they're talking about shadows, and he was like, well, there's not any shadows in the dark.
Well, he's like, for the Lord of Light, you do a lot of work in the shadows.
And she says, well, shadows do not live in the dark. They're servants of the light. And she says, the brighter the flame, the darker the shadows are.
Yeah.
So,
he says that before they hit the gate, and then he's like, oh shit, there's bars here.
And then she says, well, that doesn't matter.
That shit ain't gonna matter.
And she takes off her robe, and she's naked
and
pregnant.
Preggers.
Super pregnant.
Yeah.
And so she says, there's only one God, and he only protects those who serve him. And that's when she gives birth to a shadow figure.
A Dementor.
Which is
it like crawls out of her, is like, and like grabs her ankles for leverage, and is like, ugh.
Yeah, and it ends the episode ends with this shadow
taking shape,
and it's clearly a man.
Yeah, it's a man.
Yeah, which
a man.
Yeah. So yeah,
which we know is Stannis.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
We'll get there.
Yeah. So that's the end of the episode.
Woo, dude, my favorite scene.
Super good scene.
It's with Tyrion and Bronn coming in when he's fucking with Sansa.
Yeah, I really like that scene.
Yeah. I just love that they're just such bros now.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Tyrion doesn't even have to say anything. As soon as somebody talks shit to him, Bronn's like, hey, watch your fucking mouth.
Yeah.
You want me to cut that thing off?
Yeah, I really like how Bronn is just like,
don't be talking about dude like that.
Yeah, he knows who's paying him.
Hell yeah. And he's like, he likes him.
Yeah.
Like he clearly.
Well, I mean, he even says it later.
Well, just they're one and the same. It's like you grew up. You had two radically different upbringings, but what do you guys like? You like money? You like chicks? You like having fun?
Alive?
You like getting drunk? You like having fun? It's like you guys are bros.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's just sick that one is really smart, like book smart, like a motherfucker, and then the other one is nasty with the steel, but also incredibly street smart. So those two together,
super good.
Kind of unstoppable.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Woo.
Love it.
Alrighty.
Love that scene.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah. As always, Instagram, Twitter. I don't really use Facebook for Throne Thugs. Instagram, Twitter, Throne Thugs Podcast. If you would like to hit us up on email, it's thronethugs@gmail.com.
Yeah, just thronethugs@gmail. And also listen to our other podcast, Murd Up.
Yep. True crime.
Sounds just like this one. Holly's just telling me murder stories that I know nothing about.
Yeah. So if
chit-chat.
you want to go in Game of Thrones terms, he pretends to be Jon Snow and knows nothing.
Boom.
And I tell him a story.
And it's good shit.
Yeah.
So check that out if you like true crime.
Yeah.
And come back next time if you like this show.
Also, we're going to, one of the things we are doing on Instagram is putting up just some fun artwork that we've just find and people we know and stuff. So definitely check that out because there's a lot of artists out there that do really fun renderings.
Or if you see some cool art, tag us in it.
Yeah,
we love that shit.
Yeah, so
I'm always kind of scouring
cool.
for people's renditions of
stuff,
of the characters and
stuff.
Yeah.
They're so cool and there's so much you can do with these characters. So
for sure,
super fun.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Peace out.
See ya.